Daniel, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the intergroup to convening this panel and inviting us to speak here. When I'm asked what's the biggest thing that if you can change one thing about the EU institutions to make it more transparent, usually what I answer is transparency in the Council. I think this is really the biggest blind spot that we have today. To give you an example, so as Martin Kröger explained, we're currently negotiating or about to start negotiating the new IAA on the mandatory lobby register. But for us as Transparency International to find out how those negotiations go in the Council is a puzzle. If I had to say the spirit animal of the Council, it must be an eel. It's just impossible to grab it. I mean, just as an example, the panel here today. So we have representatives of the European Parliament, the Commission is here, the Ombudsman, of course, civil society. Try getting the Council on a panel like this and even discuss transparency issues in the Council. Everyone in the Council always says, oh, I'm not the Council. I'm just a representative of this or that member state. No one in the Parliament would say something like that. So it's very difficult to discuss even with the Council as an institution. But also then, of course, as I said, to follow the debates. When the European Council was negotiating the quotas for migration, the German newspaper Die Zeit tried to find out what are the member states' position on a debate that is happening in every single member state, that is on front pages of newspapers, or was at the time, every single day. So they wrote to the 28 governments, can you tell me what position are you defending when you're meeting the other member states? Well, more than half of the countries don't even bother to reply in any way. Most of the countries that replied said, oh, can you please send us your request in Polish or Portuguese or whatever. We don't deal with requests in English or French or something. And the very few countries that did actually reply then provide very limited information on this position. So as European citizens, how do you hold this to account? We have a democratic system, supposedly of two chambers, the European Parliament and the Council, that decide on legislation. The European Council decides on big treaties and policy matters. And there's one institution of those two where I have no idea what's being debated, how member states are taking positions, and even reconstructing this years after, and Helen can speak long about court fights of getting access to documents and member states' position there. It's a puzzle game, and we're still not quite there yet. But I think another problem here is that even in terms of accountability, how does that work? So me as a German citizen, I elect my MP into the German Bundestag, who votes for the Chancellor, who nominates the cabinet of ministers. These ministers oversee their ministry and the political line that they're taking. And those ministries then send their representatives into the Council working groups. I mean, this chain of accountability is just a bit too long for a democratic system as we all know it at the national level. Just to say as well that in a normal democracy, you elect your representatives based on a program that they put forward, and then you can follow what they're doing over 4 or 5 years, however long they're elected, and then at the next election you can kick them out. But this is not how it works in the Council. I'm not aware of a single party in Europe that has ever run on this is my election program for the next 4 years at the national level, but this is also my program for what we're going to do for 4 years in the European Council, or the Council of the European Union, in terms of policy. And the share of the national debate, I mean, I'm German, we just had national elections. The share that Europe took in this debate, I mean, it was minimal. In the televised debate of Martin Schulz and Angela Merkel, except for the questions of migration, Europe didn't show up. Future reform of Europe, nothing. So how is this kind of democracy going to work? So this is, to finish this section, is really is the biggest issue in terms of transparency, in terms of accountability that we have in the European Union today. So I already mentioned sort of following EU legislation is a difficult task. I think many of us working here in Brussels know that to really follow where a legislative initiative is at any given time kind of requires an EU affairs degree at this point. A whole industry of lobbying and consultancy lives off how difficult it is to find out where a certain debate currently is and who do I have to talk to shape the outcome of that debate. Just in terms of getting the information, why do we still not have a single portal where I can see this initiative is currently, whatever, it's still at the white paper level in the Commission, or currently debate in the Parliament is where it is, or we're in trialogues or whatever, just to follow this in one place where I can see the different positions of the different institutions that have been taken, the amendments that have been submitted. That would be a fantastic thing to have. I've been told that something along those lines is in the making. I haven't seen anything concrete yet. And just to say that if it is indeed the case that we're producing something like this, the way that websites these days, or apps even, are developed, I think is very different than what I hear how this is currently ongoing in the Commission. The way I understand the process is more the Commission, maybe in collaboration with the other institutions, 2 million euros, does a big project, then it comes out, and then we see how anyone likes that. If you compare that to the approach of how apps, how websites are built in Silicon Valley these days, it could not be more different how the approach to this is. Why are we not involving citizens more? Why aren't there beta versions out there? Why are we even thinking that we can just build something like that, then put it out there, and that's it? This should be an ongoing process where we constantly test how things are most useful to citizens and those that are supposed to use these portals. The next point I'm going to make is on following the influence. So we've said the transparency of the institutions is an issue, but how can I follow the influence? So Martin Krüger has spoken about the new IAA that has been proposed. We're, as Transparency International, really sympathetic to that process. It has already been pointed out that the positions of both Parliament and the Council, let's say, are not as welcoming as they could have been. Ms. McAvey has pointed out that the Parliament has adopted a sort of voluntary approach to not meeting unregistered lobbyists. It says in the rules of procedure now that should not happen, but no one can check, no one can really hold MEPs accountable. And even so, there was a big report drafted by MEP Sven Giegold on the transparency of the EU institutions, where some of these aspects were dealt with. So now, supposedly, those MEPs having a leading role in negotiating legislations, the rapporteurs, chairs, and shadow rapporteurs, are supposed to publish their meetings. But the interesting thing, of course, now to follow is how exactly will that work? How will that publication be done, and what is the work in the Parliament to actually make that happen? In the Council, we already said the willingness of including perm reps into the register seems to be still under discussion. There seems to be a group of member states that is generally open to the idea, but a large chunk of member states are not. And it is just puzzling me how any member state can really defend not increasing lobby transparency here in Brussels. And this can only be explained to me by the intransparency of how all this comes about. If citizens really knew that their member states are blocking lobby transparency in Brussels, I think there would be outrage in many member states. So that brings us a bit to that really quite sarcastic situation where we're discussing maybe the biggest transparency reform since the creation of the register. But much of that discussion, particularly in the Council, is happening behind closed doors. In the Parliament as well. The mandate has been adopted by the Conference of Presidents. There hasn't been a plenary vote, a broad discussion among MEPs on what Parliament's position on this should be. How can it be that we're discussing transparency in complete intransparency? To finish it all up, I think we're here on Right to Know Day. It has been mentioned that, the information that is produced by the administration, by the European Commission, but also the other institutions, this all happens with our money and with our taxpayer money and on our behalf. So I ask myself often, why do I even have to ask for documents, or for many of these documents that should be out in the open in the first place? Why don't we turn around the logic to a transparency by default? We publish those documents unless there is a very good reason not to do so. Why do we have that logic where citizens have to ask and then see if there is an exception or not? And I think, given the almost culture of leaks that we have in this city, I think it would be a good approach. And I think even the political negotiators are recognizing that more and more. And I think the direction that we're going, for example, with the Brexit negotiations, where the Commission, in my view, has almost accepted that this cannot be kept secret, so why not publish it proactively in the first place? And I think that's a good approach that shouldn't be limited just to the Brexit negotiations, but should be the general approach on these matters. Just a very last quick comment on declining citizens' trust, and one of the big elements on that is always questions of ethics, particularly personal ethics. We have submitted 4 requests for inquiry to the European Parliament just in the last couple of months. We think there's 4 MEPs that have recently breached the Code of Conduct. So far, we haven't heard back on these, so we really hope that the Parliament will investigate these cases. We also see that there is at least about 20 MEPs which currently make completely meaningless declarations of their outside activities. They just say, I'm a consultant, or I'm a freelancer and I make 10,000 euros on the side per month. This is not meaningful transparency or disclosure. No one can monitor potential conflicts of interest based on this kind of information. And one last sentence on the independent oversight on these ethics questions, and that is both for Parliament and for the European Commission. We have a bit of a problem in both cases where this ethics oversight is done by the institutions themselves, where sitting commissioners judge on potential ethics breaches of their colleagues or former colleagues, same in the European Parliament. So we would like to suggest an independent ethics oversight body, ideally covering all the institutions that can take care of ethics breaches, of ethics issues with revolving doors and so on. I'm going to leave it at that for now. Thanks.